After I posted my reaction and analysis of Wren and Webby's neurodivergence song and video, many of you were gracious in asking me to go back and consider how I came across. And I thank you for that. My statement of support for labels, for diagnosis that I had made in that video. And please understand me, I am not saying that there is not validity and usefulness in these terms and in these labels. It was nowhere near weighty enough to balance the rant and the perspective I would go on to so passionately share. I'm asking your forgiveness for being insensitive, overly brash, and one-sided. And I need to say this, my experiences, my journey, and how I feel about my experiences and journey do not invalidate your experiences, your journey, and how you feel. And my views based on my experiences don't make my views more right than another person. They're simply my views based on my baggage, my pain. But I realized after many people called it to my attention, and I went back and watched the video that I'd made, that I was reacting to my own hurt and my own anger rather than sharing from a place of vulnerability. And that is what I'd like to do now, if you'll let me. First, I have a neighbor and an extremely good friend who was diagnosed with ADHD later in life, and she uses this as a tool to get to know herself and to relate to others better. And she feels like having that label, and many of you said the same thing, that having that diagnosis has been freeing for her. And I've done courses. I've worked with artists who have had these labels, had these diagnoses, and found incredible benefit and used the treatment that they have gotten from experts and from community. It's not only part of their story, it's part of their success. My wife helped support our family for many years as a registered nurse. My father-in-law, who passed away just last year, was a family physician and one of the most beautiful people I will ever know. And we have close family friends who are surgeons, doctors, and are not only trustworthy, but some of the smartest people you will ever come in contact with. My health struggles really began when I turned 15 and started developing extreme debilitating shoulder pain in my right shoulder. And despite trying to, stretch and rest, playing basketball and doing certain activities at age 15 had made this incredibly difficult for me. So I went to the doctor and they gave me anti-inflammatories and they gave me steroid shots. Neither of those worked. I wouldn't understand why some of these things didn't work later, but in my youth and in the trajectory and the knowledge that I had and my parents had at the time, we didn't understand much. And so we were just following the advice of the medical system that we were a part of. Eventually, I would go on to get arthroscopic surgery in this shoulder. This still doesn't have the range of motion that this shoulder does. I still struggle with it. The surgery did not work. And it cost me many, many months of my youth of not being able to do the things that I wanted to do. A few years later, being very passionate about the guitar, I had practiced and started feeling tingling in my fingers and pain down in my elbow, the ulnar nerve. I went through the same process, went to the doctor, this is hurting. Why is this hurting? Help it not hurt. Went down a bunch of medications and those didn't work. And then it was suggested that I had surgery. They wanted to take the nerve or tendon and they wanted to move it to the outside of my elbow. And they said that we can't guarantee you'll ever be able to play the guitar again, but this is what you should do. But with both my shoulder and my arm, I wasn't asked by anybody in the medical field, well, what kinds of things are you doing to exacerbate the problems? It was so quick to diagnose and prescribe. And you know what? I now know that those counseling aspects that I didn't get, it was never part of the medical profession. At least at that time, it wasn't part of that. I needed to go seek wisdom from guitar players or physical therapists, all those things. But I didn't really do that at the time. I just went directly to the medical field and I got diagnosed, labeled, and treated with what they were doing. Later on, I would discover the value of all these other ways of healing. But I went many, many years kind of expecting more than the medical system that I was a part of was really designed to give me. I elected to not go for that surgery, but continued to not be able to play guitar or do sports. And I felt like things started to get worse with my body. Things started to spread out a little bit in terms of pain. And I'm like, what is going on? And I became depressed, suffered extreme amounts of anxiety, insomnia, massive loss of appetite. And so I went back to the doctors and said, here's how I'm feeling. I need help. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression and insomnia and written prescriptions. I started taking those medicines, believing, trusting that they would help. The medications messed me up even more. I began to have more pain, for which they'd give me more pain-killing type drugs. And then I would have depression and anxiety drugs, and then I'd have sleep drugs. One would counteract the other, and so they'd balance things. And it became this overwhelming sense of helplessness. I have become a slave to these things going into my body that I don't understand and that don't seem to be working, despite that I want them to be I had no judgment on these at all. I wanted them to work. Please help them work. So I went through the painful process of weaning off of all of that stuff and switched to homeopathy and pleaded my case with this homeopathist who, again, put me on all these different, asked for my symptoms. I told him my symptoms, and he would give me these things to try, and I would do them, and I would wait. I had high expectations for that as well. It didn't work. And I became incredibly lonely and discouraged that, yes, I am indeed broken. And this homeopathist reinforced that because I went to him and I said, look, none of this feels like it's working. And his response to me was, maybe you don't want to grow up. I walked out and I never went to him again. As I now see it, each doctor and each specialist was working within their own area of expertise, and they were treating my symptoms in a vacuum. This is what they'd been trained to do and what they're paid to do. And so to diverge out of that is not in their job description. It's not their fault. It's not really anybody's fault. It's just that this particular area of medicine is, and at the time, far less broad and encompassing than I didn't really have words to say it, but then I had expected it to be. And even the homeopathist, I think he just got to a point where he was just frustrated with me because I was depending on him to help me be healed, and that wasn't happening, and I was frustrated, and quite frankly, I think he just wanted me gone. Like, this, I'm not going to be able to help this guy. Get out of here. That's how I felt. And you know what? My experience does not mean that people should not get surgeries or that they shouldn't take medicine. I know tons and tons of people who are on medications for mental health, for physical ailments, ongoing physical ailments. I know people who've had incredible success with surgeries. So the fact that I've struggled in these ways does not invalidate those at all. I reached a low point shortly after I went back to the traditional medicine at the time and was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And they wanted to put me on other treatments. And I just said, I don't think I can do this. And so I went back to my apartment. I remember my brother had stopped by, who was in incredible health at the time. And he wanted to borrow my mountain bike to lend to a friend so that they could go out and go mountain biking because I couldn't use it. I couldn't bike. I was in too much pain. And so I gave him the bike and I went and I took a bath. And I remember laying flat in the bath as the water was filling up. And I remember looking down like this and looking at my chest and being able to see all the bones in my chest, like in my ribs and everything. And I was a complete skeleton, and I could see that I was in bad shape. And I looked at myself in the mirror before, but for some reason that angle was like, oh man, I am dying. I have got to figure out how to make a change. And there was this moment where I heard this, I don't know if it was a voice or what, but it's not up to them, it's up to you. And I didn't really know what that meant. I just knew that I had to take matters into my own hands, and I had to sort of forge ahead with there was no wrong answers. There's no wrong way to do anything. The only wrong thing is inactivity and not acting, just being defeated. Like I wasn't going to be defeated. I ended up getting some counseling. I ended up doing some physical therapy. And man, it was so hard to do because some of the things I was having to do is like, man, I'm in my, early 20s and I'm here with all these people who are way further along in life. And like, it was just such a demoralizing thing initially, but I began to see progress. And then my brother gave me this book that he had used to start weight training. Initially, I was like, I can't do that. I can't even, lift my guitar case or ride a bike. He was like, no, you know what? Just start somewhere. In fact, start eating the way that this book, at least some of what this book asks you to eat like, and see what happens. So I started studying that and paying attention to how my body felt. And it was a long journey, but over time with counseling and adjusting my nutrition and learning more and more about that stuff and exercising, doing what I could and investing what I could and learning to listen to my body, I began to heal. I began to truly heal. Fast forward, I was newly married, had a new job, had to move halfway across the country for my new job, started my new job, was adjusting to life completely on my own with my support system completely in a different state and too many miles away to really interact with on a meaningful basis, or so I thought. It wasn't more than a few months then I started developing symptoms of unbearable acid reflux. It was affecting my work at my new job. So I felt like I was failing. I actually had my boss tell me, hey, you need to go to the doctor and get this worked out because we don't want to be the source of your health declining, which I thought was a very thoughtful thing. So I went to the doctor. The doctor put a scope down my throat and vocal cords are just fine, but man, you've got tons of acid reflux. And I can see that your esophagus is being burnt and that you are at risk of Barrett's esophagus if you do not treat this acid reflux. And I said, okay, I need to treat it. Let's do it. So he put me on proton pump inhibitors. There were no questions about diet, stress, nothing. It was labeled, diagnosed, and prescribed. That put me on the path of being on the proton pump inhibitor, the same proton pump inhibitor, for the next 7 years. I just went into work and actually it did. It worked. Like I was able to go do everything and I didn't have to change any of my lifestyle habits. Medicine worked for about 7 years. And then it stopped working. And then I went to the doctor and they said, oh, well, sometimes that happens. You need to go to a different proton pump inhibitor. So I went to a different one. And then that one stopped working after only a few months. And then I went to a different one. And that one stopped working after only a few months. And then I was told, okay, well, you need to start supplementing. I was like, oh, this is crazy. I need to be on more than just the proton pump inhibitors. So I got on 3 different types of acid reducing, acid blocking therapies and medications. And it was also suggested that I go have my a different kind of scope, not a scope that just went to your vocal cords and was able to see like the very top of things, but went all the way down and looked at this valve right here. So I had this procedure done. They went all the way down here and looked and the doctor determined that that this valve was failing, that it wasn't closing. It was just kind of flappy. Regardless of, what I was taking, if I laid down or if I, was pushing or whatever, the stuff would just kind of come up and rest here and it would cause more acid reflux. And how do I fix this? The doctor, who was also a surgeon, said, you need surgery. We need to tie this up so that it stays closed because it's broken. Even with all the other stuff that I went through, all the other diagnoses and struggles, I didn't really even think at the time to ask him, well, why is it broken? I didn't ask him that. I would later ask that question all over the place. But I did say, is there anything else? And he goes, you need surgery, son. Whether it was or wasn't, it felt condescending. It very much felt like a business thing. He did this thing. He showed me, okay, sign up for surgery. I can't judge that was his intention, but in my my emotional state, my mental state, and with my past, that's how I felt. My wife, having been a nurse and treated people who had the surgery that he was suggesting, said, man, at your age and with, as healthy as you are otherwise and your level of activity, that surgery is not going to last. As you sing and do other things that you do, I can see that thing really giving way soon. And she'd seen a lot of complications. And the only other option was really, okay, I guess I just got to keep staying on these PPIs and doing different dosages and change my diet a little bit. That's where I landed for many, many years. And the insomnia returned. Paranoid about my stomach eating my esophagus alive in the night, I was unable to sleep. I became anxious. The depression returned. And I went back to the doctor and said, all right, I need sleeping medication. And I need anti-anxiety medication. And so we went on the whole balancing med things again. And at this point, I was married and I had young kids. And I remember one night, I woke up in this sort of rage. Maybe that's a little bit too extreme of a word, but I woke up and I just started beating my bedding and my pillows, just punching them and yelling at them. And then I went downstairs, remove myself from the upstairs where my wife and kids could hear me and would be disturbed. I went downstairs and just sat in a chair and rocked and cried and cried and cried. I felt totally helpless again. And around this time, I had just started filming videos for an online education company. And this was all new to me. I'd never filmed videos before and was pretty insecure about it. Some of these videos were posted on YouTube as advertisement for the services that I and this company was doing. I began to have people come to me. Some of these were in form of YouTube comments, and some of them were just people coming up to me, not coworkers necessarily, but people who'd seen the videos and people who also had admittedly been diagnosed, maybe rightly so, with other things, but I didn't know them very well. And I didn't know how to filter or listen to what other people said in a healthy way at that point because I was so insecure. And I had people telling me that I must be neurodivergent because I couldn't stop shifting my eyes. I must be on the spectrum because I would rock and I would do this, even on video, and I wouldn't even catch myself doing it. And it was crazy. And that was something that I've been rocking ever since I was a tiny, tiny child. Sometimes I do it without knowing it. Sometimes I do it on my YouTube videos without knowing it. I began to have massive trouble focusing at work because I couldn't sleep and because I felt like people were watching me and putting me under the microscope, and it was this incredibly debilitating thing. Went back to the doctor again, and this time, because I had people telling me these things, I was like, I think I'm ADHD. He listened to the things that I'd been talking about, and he's like, yep, I think ADHD medication could help you. I actually got the prescription. Then there was this other check, and I was like, I don't think I'm going to do this. I don't really even know why, but I don't think I'm going to do it. And again, this is not to minimize people who have chosen to get on that medication and find the right medication and stick with the medical system till you get the correct diagnosis. I'm not taking away from that. I'm just sharing my experiences. It wasn't until my wife and I would have back-to-back miscarriages after having 2 healthy children that we would find our current family doctor, who breath of so much fresh air, and walked through those miscarriages with us, as well as our families, and has been an incredible support to me, to us. And he was really the first, other than my father-in-law, was the first doctor that I'd gone to see professionally that had really would ask me tons of questions. You know, I would talk to him about all the things, and even the past things, and not ranting, but just saying, you know, here's how I felt, here's what, and you know, I wasn't sleeping, and you know, with the miscarriages and stuff, the anxiety and all that stuff came back, and he was extremely hesitant to make any sorts of diagnoses, and to ask just tons of questions and get me to think. He would make me ask questions. Some of these questions I didn't like the answers to them. I really didn't like the answers, but he was getting me to ask questions. And then my wife, just very recently, has started schooling in nutritional therapy. I began to see a nutritional therapist as well. And the perspectives that I have gleaned from this type of training, I'm not even going to call it treatment. It's different ways to think. The most revelatory thing for me was based on my stomach. And this is so exciting for me because I have felt liberated and freed by simply thinking differently. Not that thinking differently is simple. It's been the hardest thing for me in the world because of all the baggage. And sometimes that doesn't work for people, but it is working sometimes for me. Not to say that I don't go back to being anxious. I still have trouble sleeping, but I am not an insomniac. I just have trouble sleeping. Not all the time, sometimes, even though sometimes it feels like all the time. And this is the perspective that has helped me tell myself that I'm not broken, that I'm okay, that I'm enough. Now, let's work the problem. The perspective of the nutritional therapist is that the reason that this valve had become non-responsive and non-functioning was because the pH balance in my stomach was too low. With all the antacid medication I was taking, my stomach could not digest the food properly and in a timely manner. And so it was fermenting, causing gases to happen, just sitting there and causing burps and stuff like that. So my acid was too low to digest the food, but still high enough to burn my esophagus. And what's interesting is when this stuff doesn't get digested properly, a lower valve that goes into your small intestines won't release. It won't let the food go into because it's not at that stage yet. So it would just sit there and cause these problems, really no matter what I ate. And when I heard this, I was like, this makes sense. And it's actually really scary. I initially rejected it entirely. I was like, no, I'm feeling acid. My acid is too high. And I was encouraged through my wife and through this other nutritional therapist. It's like, look, these other things that you've been doing for these years and years and years, they're not working anymore. You got to have an open mind. You got to try this. It's like, okay, I will choose to think about this differently. Whew. I can say that after, it's only been 6 months or so, I went from taking 3 different types of medications to taking a quarter pill per day of a proton pump inhibitor, studying what certain foods did to my body, not someone else's body, but my body, doing more counseling and introspection and managing my stress and changing how I viewed myself. Again, not as someone who is broken, but as someone who is in process and learning to heal and embrace healing. Whatever that means. I learned to keep a more open perspective than I had in the past. If I had to sum up my journey so far, it would come from the example that my current primary care physician has given me, and that is to constantly be asking questions, to be okay with not having answers, or to be okay that you don't like the answers, but to continue to ask questions and continue to listen to my body, listen to all viewpoints, not hang on any one viewpoint, test those with other questions that I'm asking. This alone, really, has been the catalyst for my healing. Really, until recently, and I think I started to do it, decades ago in some areas of my life, but not in other areas. Certain areas were off limits. And I think that there was maybe an element of pride there, but also I think it was mostly just fear to really ask those questions, because, and a lot of it too was fear of, if I ask those questions, am I going to be labeled something else that I don't want to be labeled? And then am I going to be judged for being that? Pride is rooted in fear, right? And just last year, my son, who is now 15, was diagnosed with a condition called pectus excavatum, which is a condition where your chest is indented. You have this kind of hole or indent here that can press on your organs, lungs and stuff like that, and make it difficult for you to function, breathe, your heart. The doctor that we trust mentioned, you should go see a specialist about this. He looked at it and saw how it was developing. We went to this surgeon, and the surgeon just sort of gave us this rundown of, like, it was almost this foregone conclusion that because we were going to visit her, that we were going to have surgery. This wasn't like a pre-surgery appointment. This was just, we need more information. Maybe surgery's the way to go. Well, we got information about the surgery, and I remember leaving with my son, and we looked at each other, and he knows my journey, and he looked at me and goes, "No. What I'd have to trade in my youth for that surgery?" And so we went out and we found someone on the internet who suffered from this, but had an incredible program aimed at people who suffer from pectus excavatum to help them train using weight training to minimize it. Now, am I saying that surgery is wrong for everybody? No. Some people need it. It turns out that this helped my son. It continues to help my son. Is it gone? No. But it is manageable, and it is going away. It will never fully go away because there's anatomy things going on that's how his body is. But it's managed, and he can run track, and he can play basketball, and he can lift weights, and he can go rock climbing. And he has a perfectly healthy cardiovascular system. I'm proud of him. So there's my story. Maybe I'll update it in a little while. I don't know. Please leave your story in the comments below. I will read it. I hope this was helpful, and I hope, if nothing else, that you are able to start finding joy in asking questions and being okay with the fact that these questions may go unanswered indefinitely or for a really long time, but that the joy is in the pursuit of discovery, not necessarily in the discovery itself. And in there somewhere, I'm learning, is at least some degree of healing.